Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our Second Innings Reflections. Suman and I had a really cool chat with Vikas Tandon and Siddarth Menon last week. It was a fun chat, and it was definitely one of our best episodes, including the first time that someone performed a song on our podcast, which we really enjoyed. Clearly, one of themes of the episode was talking about self-awareness and how important it is, the power of awareness, and moving from role to role without thinking what it takes is typically what all of us do in our careers, which is just following a cultural script.
Yeah, and especially Sid, the role, the career which he had at Colgate, I thought was quite fascinating. He kept jumping from role to role. 11 years there, was doing extremely well. And in the last role, he said, I had a leadership role. I was flying high, but I was hating it. Okay, which is kind of counterintuitive. And he said, whatever I was throwing at it, I kept trying to get better, but it just wasn't working. And that probably uh, set off this thing of self introspection, which we'll talk about. Uh, and this thing about I'm not a business person was also a realization he got at that time. And he said, after that, I was not looking for any large organization because they would give me only a business role. And it dawned on me that that is not something that I was enjoying. Even to figure out that you hit a brick wall itself talks a lot about self awareness. Otherwise, you're just
Absolutely.
going at it. But to even introspect and say, hey, you know what? I have a hit a brick wall. Let me do something about it.
Absolutely. And, ties in someone very well with, we asked them about what they felt was a good time to do this in
Yeah.
their careers. And Sid was very interesting. His approach was that I had got 12, 13 years of a great foundation working at large companies, which have been around for hundreds of years. And as a result, and he was saying even today in his work, that helps him a lot, that strong foundation, the learnings, the structures, the processes. And I
Yeah.
think that was an interesting little insight into building a foundation and then building what you want to do on that foundation.
Let's talk a bit about self introspection. I kind of linked to self awareness, but there was a lot of talk of introspection, taking time out to introspect. That also I thought was quite profound, saying that you cannot introspect while you're on the treadmill. And this is very true for people in corporate jobs and senior positions. You need to step off the treadmill to introspect. And that's what he did. He decided to do it for 9 months. It went on for a year and a half, in which he really got the clarity, the way he was thinking about the whole thing. He made 3 points. One, he said, I realized I was an introvert, right? I was going from room to room, from meeting to meeting, was only draining energy for me. The other thing he said is that I've always enjoyed problem solving, being creative, being strategic in my previous roles. And that is something that was missing. So overall, he was looking more for, he realized it was more about strategy that would work for him, because he was a 30,000 feet guy
Yeah.
as opposed to being operational. He can do it, but it won't excite him that much.
That is true. That is true. And what was very interesting for me in his approach, he hit a brick wall, which
Yeah.
is not uncommon in corporate careers. A lot of people feel that they're stagnating, or different types of brick wall experiences happen. And
Yeah.
he introspected,
Mm,
and you made a very good point during our podcast to him, Suman, which was that not just the what and the how, but the
mm,
critical thinking involved with the understanding the whys, going
mm,
levels deeper for him
mm.
to understand why he was responding the way he
Yeah.
was to the
Yeah.
challenges that he was. He felt, after having thought about it, and I loved the way he said, after quitting on Friday, he was a new man on Monday morning, because he suddenly felt that he was free of the shackles.
Yeah.
And also he felt, after a lot of self introspection inspection and critically thinking about himself, he wanted to avoid large organizations. He was
Yes.
clear that the business roles, which require a lot more doing, a lot more operational execution, was not for him. And that
Mm.
requires not only an ability to look at yourself, but to actually critically examine yourself a lot, which I think was commendable for Sid to do.
And it's so counterintuitive. I think most people who are big company people, they continue growing in an organization and they would finally retire from that organization. But here is
Hmm.
somebody who's successful, who's growing, but then he realizes that he's hit a point where it's going to be more and more business roles, and that's not something he is enjoying doing anymore. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
very often a typical reaction to this situation would be that the person would switch companies or switch
yes.
roles, And that would
Yeah.
be their solution for the short term. But Sid really decided to take a much bigger step in his career and his life, a transition which has, worked for him quite well.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Somebody would just say, Madani Aras, and he'll go on to some other place, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
And his thinking did go deeper. He talked of two things. He said, my natural disposition is to zoom out. So essentially being more like a thinker than a doer, more strategic than operational. And he said, you don't have to try and do everything, but you have to be clear as to what you do well. And the other thing he said was, my core need state is harmony. In fact, we asked him what that means, and it basically means, hey, I still want to, do my sport in the morning, and I don't want to do a startup because that's going to take away all of that.
Yeah.
So I
It's
can't do anything
it's all
single-handedly.
consuming, and he didn't want to do something that also consuming in that sense. Yeah.
And which is why he decided not to be an entrepreneur. But
Yeah.
so here he was, didn't want the big company business role, and that's when he explored and he said, let me not become an entrepreneur. And I think that's when the epigamia thing started.
Yeah. Something interesting we discussed with both of them, and these are little bits in multiple parts of the conversations that we had about when is it a good time to reflect
Yeah.
on what are your areas of interest. Is it something you do at a younger age, younger being maybe in your 20s or even early 30s? And between them, they had some interesting thoughts. At an early age, Vikas mentioned, you don't really have that many data points or that many pieces of information about yourself. So you're really collecting experiences, bringing about development in your personality, your interest areas, etc. And taking a slightly portfolio approach is something that we've talked about in earlier episodes, and that it's an interesting way to look at hobbies, passions, areas of interest. Some of them could develop into maybe passion projects and maybe even a second innings later in your life. And we also talked about how excellence with something you're passionate about is not necessarily required. Many people don't take a plunge because they're not brilliant at their passion area, which is fine. It may only be a hobby in the end. Having said that, success can become a barrier to delving into something else because you're so good at who you are, at what you do as your day job, let's say, that it's addictive. It's something that you really enjoy, and you don't want to dabble into something where you're going to be a little bit of an amateur. And you doing the same thing over and over again is very, very interesting. It's almost formulaic. It's something that works well, so you keep at it.
The other interesting piece was this entire talk of stress, which is part of self-awareness and self-introspection. I liked it because it's really talking about emotions. So Sid said something. He said, I realized that if I'm feeling stressed very often, then something is wrong. Okay. And that came out of awareness because he said, when I was working in those last 2 years, if you had told me that time you're stressed, I would have denied it. I was not even aware of the fact that I was stressed. Okay. But I realized now that I'm aware of the stress. And he talked of dispositions. He said, I know I'm stressed. How do I know I'm stressed? Because if there is something going on in the room and I want to leave the room, I know I'm stressed because somehow it's making me uncomfortable. And some people might have a different disposition. Somebody might say, I'm not going to leave the room till I get this sorted out. Whereas this guy wants to get out of the room. So that was, a trigger for him to figure out what was causing him stress. He also said, aware of my core emotion, which is a trigger, right? And the core emotion for him was anger. And he's normally a peaceful person, according to him. But if he's getting angry, it's a wake up call saying that something is off and I need to work on it. Vikas also mentioned that this is about high stress, but even boredom can be a trigger. No, you may not be stressed, but you're just bored. So, but I think the awareness thing is about realizing that these are triggers when you need to go back and reflect.
Overall, a great conversation. And, we look forward to many more conversations like that.